And now a one-take audiobook production of Hot Lead Payoff by L. Ron Hubbard. Introduction. Hot Lead Payoff, a new serial by L. Ron Hubbard, is blazoned across the top of the June 25, 1938 issue of Western Story magazine. Underneath, a sneering gunslinger in his 10-gallon hat, holding 2 6-guns poised to fire, is framed by the swinging doors of a Cowtown saloon. Potential readers picking up the magazine at their local newsstands had every right to be excited by the implied promise of the cover. While the illustration would have caught their attention, the names L. Ron Hubbard and Western Story magazine would have convinced them that what they were about to read was the best in Western action and adventure. Ron had been a regular contributor to Street and Smith's Western magazine since 1934, when he sold his first Western, maybe because, to Cowboy Stories. He even wrote several stories for their Romantic Range magazine, but their leading magazine in the genre was Western Story. This popular magazine was undoubtedly the top of the line and had a long tradition among Western readers going back to 1919 when it was first established by Street and Smith. Jack Burr, who had earlier been an assistant editor at Dell Publications and was familiar with Ron's consistent good work for 5 Novels Monthly magazine, became the editor at Western Story in late 1937. Intent on increasing quality and boosting his circulation even higher, Burr wrote to Ron offering him top rates. In March 1938, Western Story published Ron's exciting short story 6-Gun Caballero, and then followed with another, The Toughest Ranger. But Burr wanted more than short stories, and Ron soon delivered with the novel Hot Lead Payoff, published as a 4-part serial over the summer of 1938. Ron was highly respected by other writers for his westerns. After reading one of Ron's stories, writer Russell Hayes, who knew his way around a Western story, expressed his admiration in a letter. "Wall, partner, I read that there story in this here Western Story magazine, and dang it if it weren't all right. No sour notes. Seriously, I envy your ability to bat out that smooth a yarn. Of the writers who bust into the pulps or slicks either, this is just about 1 in 10 who ever reached the level of consistently flowing out smooth ones, avoiding sour something or others. The knack is like Bing Crosby singing, smooth and no jar to it." Ron spent the first half of 1938 in New York City, where he was active with various writing and publishing projects. Buckskin Brigades had been released in a hardbound edition by Macmillan the previous year, and its popularity resulted in Complete Northwest magazine republishing the historical Western in its entirety in their October 1938 issue. Ron spent the second half of the year at his home in Port Orchard in Washington State, where he wrote numerous stories. Some of the stories published during that period were The Boss of the Lazy Bee, Ruin at Rio Piedras, Empty Saddles, and Branded Outlaw. Hot Lead Payoff has all the earmarks of a classic Western, but it also contains the elements which can be found in any great story that endears a reader to the characters in the fiction world created by the author. Gone are the days when the Nolans were the most important family in Arizona. In fact, Tom Nolan has been trying to make a go of the Crazy Ann Ranch since he was 15 years old, and his father died of alcoholism. Now another family led by Martin Graham, a carpetbagger who grew rich on illegal dealings, has moved into the area with enough guns and money to take over the entire state, and they are not wasting any time going about it. The Crazy N is their next target. Join Ron on the trail of Tom Nolan, where courage, strength, and the ability to use a gun mark the difference between life and death. Hot Lead Payoff. The Bobolink. The ancient bells in the crumbling Dobe church sent rolling rings of sound into the streets of Rio Camarca. It was Easter Sunday, and the pueblo throbbed with joyous color as gaily mantilled women paraded along the walks in silver-decorated vaqueros proudly trotted their horses through the dust. Americanos stood about in languid groups, soaking up sunshine while others inside sponged more powerful liquid. Spring was crystal in the air, and a gentle wind was bringing the scent of sage in from the sweeping plains which stretched limitlessly north into the United States and south into Mexico. On the porch of a house set far back from the street and masked with shrubs stood Tom Nolan and George Blanchard, the only and therefore biggest banker in all the country around Rio Camarca. It pleased George to be jocular on this, a holiday. It pleased him to show the world now and then that a banker could on occasion be human. "Nolan," said Blanchard with heavy-heartedness, "it's like you to pick Easter Sunday to talk business." Tom Nolan looked a little embarrassed. He was young and still impressed by obvious respectability and position and money. "It's been on my mind, Blanchard. I had come in to get the bobolink, young Bob, and I thought I might as well make the trip count double. I didn't mean to break into your day, but with the Grahams cutting into the market and underselling me—" "Think nothing of it, my boy," said Blanchard, patting Tom's shoulder above him with a friendly, flabby hand. "You've got to watch your step, of course, or the Grahams will gobble you up. Was a time when Nolans owned this country, but," and he sighed a diplomatic sigh, "those days are done. The Grahams are ruining things for the rest of us. Funny how a carpetbagger like old Martin Graham could scoop a fortune out of Texas and then walk in and most buy Arizona. Yes, you've got to watch your step, and I'm right here to help you. Old Martin Graham's sworn to run you Nolans out of Arizona for keeps, and we can't let that happen." Suddenly, the man's bland smile was distasteful to Tom. He suspected that Blanchard would say the same about him, to Martin Graham. Blanchard lumbered on, all unknowing. "Yes, sir, carpetbag money, a Bible in one hand and a knife in the other, that's old Martin Graham. And that boy of his isn't any slouch of a gunfighter neither. Yes, Tom, the good old days have gone. If your father hadn't let the crazy end slip so far—" "I'm taking care of the crazy end," said Tom with sudden frost. "Oh, I didn't mean any offense," chuckled Blanchard. "You Nolans yanked this country out of the rough and fought it into shape, and you killed off and hanged the undesirables. But you've got to admit, Tom Nolan, that you are level-headed. You've got an eye for business, and there's not one flighty thing about you. Sober, that's the word for it. Now take your brother. He never draws a sober breath, and he isn't much interested in the crazy end. He always—" "We were talking about money," cut in Tom. George Blanchard knew he had been too familiar. One never got familiar with Nolans, and for a moment he had forgotten that Tom was one after all. He looked with a slight twinge of fear at the man before him. Tom Nolan was 6 feet tall, and there was a solid look about his shoulders. His features were regular, even handsome, but there didn't ever seem to be much joy in the man, and right now Blanchard felt like he had run into the side of a butte. "We'll leave Bob out of this," said Tom. "I'm putting up the ranch against the payroll and store bills that are due, and as soon as I finish shipping, you'll get it back." "Oh, certainly, certainly," said Blanchard. "Of course I will. No offense, Nolan. I'm counting on you. You know that. The Grahams are getting too big in this country." Again, Blanchard stopped at a warning glint in Nolan's eye and realized that for a diplomatic banker he was not doing so well this sunny Easter morning. Hastily, he tried to backtrack. "The Grahams are not all bad, of course. There's Mary Graham, and say, isn't she a beautiful girl?" "And we'll leave her out, too," said Tom. "If you could give me the money now, you'd save me a lot of trouble." "Sorry," said Blanchard, "but the Overland stage is bringing in my extra cash in the morning, and I haven't a spare dime. Everybody wants money for the spring roundups, and though I wouldn't mind opening the bank for you even though it is a holiday, the safe's empty. You come in for it tomorrow, Tom." Nolan nodded and put on his flat-top, flat-brimmed Stetson. He pulled the chin thong in place and nodded again. Turning, he walked down the steps and out into the street. Mealy-mouthed old fool, muttered Tom. The vaqueros saluted him, and women along the walks looked at him sidelong as he strode through the crowds. Tom Nolan, sober, industrious, and generally inaccessible, was a target for many an invitation he never saw. He was carrying the world, or at least Rio Camarca, on his shoulders, and all this gaiety and color went unseen. He did not even hear the pleas from the crumbling church in the center of the plaza. Ahead was a dobe building bearing the sign, The Oasis. He knew he would find Bob there, and he also knew that he would have a hard time getting Bob to come along home. Some of the punchers in front of the building winked at each other and then saluted Tom. As he passed one group, he heard a man whisper, "He should have been a parson." Nolan never quarreled openly, which made him very different from 3 generations of Nolans in the Rio Camarca country. He let the remark pass. Just before he stepped into the noisy interior, he glanced back at the plaza. He stopped. The Grahams were just entering town for the church services. 2 crazy end punchers instinctively stepped out of the crowd before the Oasis and came up beside Tom. It was like a feudal train, the coming of the Grahams. Martin Graham, harsh of feature and spare of body, with an eye like a vulture, was in the lead. Behind him came young Allen, the cold and arrogant heir to the Graham empire. Several vaqueros and American punchers followed at a slow pace, each copying the attitude of Martin Graham, and each with a silver G worked into head, stall, and saddle. Riding side saddle behind them, surrounded by several lesser women, was Mary. And Tom's heart skipped a beat. She was a lordly lady, Mary Graham. She was a woman of whom a man could be proud, and one that might wear his name and give it honor. Fuzzy Jones, the crazy N major domo at Tom's side, whispered, "Better get Bob out of town, huh?" Tom turned and went into the Oasis. The church bells could not be heard here, drowned out as they were by the rumbling of wheels and the slap of cards and loud laughter. It did not take Tom an instant to spot the bobolink. The younger Nolan was running true to form. He was sitting on the bar, and he had just finished a song on how he was challenging the drinkers, daring them to say they didn't like it. No one said anything, and in disgust the bobolink kicked a Mexican half across the room with a spurred boot. The Mexican brought up with a crash of tables, and a poker player surged up and landed one to the gaping jaw, and the Mexican was catapulted onward. With the others, Bob was laughing. Tom came quickly to his side and started to speak. "Bob, the Grahams just—" "Well," said the youth with a belligerent grin, "if it ain't my guardian angel, how's Gabriel, Tom? Have a drink." "Look, Bob, the Grahams just came in. Fuzzy and Sidewinder are getting our horses. Let's get out of here before there's trouble." "Trouble?" said the bobolink with a grin which lighted his handsome face. "Lead me to it, Tom, old boy." "Listen, Bob, this is one time we can't have any scraps. I just fixed it up with Blanchard." "Business," said the bobolink as though it were a curse. "Here I'm having a fine time and you talk about business." "Well, listen," said Tom. "Until we get our shipping done, we want no trouble." "The Grahams. I suppose you think I'm afraid of the Grahams. Well, what the hell gave you that idea, huh? Where's that young fool, huh? Where's that Alan Graham? I rubbed his nose in the street last month, and I'll do it again. Lead me to him." "There's only Fuzzy and Sidewinder and you and I," Tom said urgently, "and there must be 30 of them." The bobolink got a sudden idea. He grinned boyishly. "Oh, I get it. Mary, yeah, that's it. Mary, I can't say as I agree with you, but I can see your point. And always business, huh, Tom? You got your head full of figures while I get mine full of red eye. Come on, Tom, have a drink and forget it. Have a drink and we'll go out and rub Alan's nose in the—" "Not today," said Tom, now begging. The bobolink felt the granite in his brother. He had always been a little afraid of Tom, realizing he was not begging now. With a jingle, he slid down off the bar and jerked his Colt into place. He handed the guitar back to the bartender and emptied his last glass. "Boy, I'm good today," said Bobolink. "Maybe it's Easter. Maybe I'm getting religious, huh?" The men in the room had heard that the Grahams were in town. Gradually the wheels had stopped whirring, and now scarcely a card moved. In silence, the Bobolink and Tom crossed the oasis and went outside. Fuzzy and Sidewinder were anxious. They had 4 horses there, and they were both watching the grand cavalcade come around the plaza toward them. The Bobolink was drunker than he talked and he looked. He made several passes at a stirrup, and finally Tom seized his knee and threw him into the saddle. Fuzzy and Sidewinder had lost no time and were already mounted. Tom swung up on his black mare Ginger and neck-reined out into the street. But the Grahams were too close to ignore, though it appeared that Martin Graham was bent upon such a course. The Bobolink swung his mount around to face the approaching parade, and a wicked grin was on his face. Martin Graham was not 20 feet away. Tom saw now that his timing had been all wrong, and that he had underestimated the Bobolink's cargo. "Hello, you old buzzer," said Bob. "Come on," pleaded his older brother. Martin Graham, even then, would have ignored the Nolans. "Hello, Alan," called the Bobolink. "Still drinking out of horse troughs?" That reference to the last meeting between Alan and the Bobolink was like a blast of lightning to Rio Camarca. There had been a rumor, but here was the fact. The Bobolink had been the one who had dunked Alan in that dark night a month before. Alan was arrogant and hot-headed. He went white and stiff in his saddle. Martin Graham reined back swiftly and caught Alan's bridle. "Don't let him get himself hurt," called the Bobolink, laughing. "You should have brought more men. There's 2 of us Nolans." Nothing so close to an open break had ever occurred before. Tom dug spur and shot around the Bobolink to throw Ginger's weight against the Mustang and ride his brother off. "Bob," prayed Tom, "for God's sakes, quit." "I don't like to talk to thieves neither," stated the Bobolink, "even if you are sweet on that prize rag of calico back there." "Hello, Mary." The girl's face was white as paper and her eyes were blazing. "Come on, Tom," said Bob. "They're scared. Let's mess them up." The Bobolink's hand was stabbing down toward his Colt. Tom's quirt crackled like a pistol shot and then struck again on the Mustang's flank. Ginger, with quick intelligence, plunged ahead and rode the wild horse off, turning him expertly back. Tom glanced once at Mary Graham and then hazed the Bobolink out of town. Ginger, sensing Tom's intention, herded the Mustang righteously, and the Mustang which Bob rode was most displeased, but unwilling to fight about it. Fuzzy and Sidewinder, who had both been with old man Nolan, rode in silent amazement, staring at Tom's back. At a trot, the group struck the wagon track which led toward the Crazy Inn, and although there was not a cloud in the sky, there was thunder in the air and lightning in the young Bobolink's eyes. He was nursing the welt Tom's quirt had left upon his wrist, and his young face was weighted with a frown. They rode for a mile, and Rio Camarca dwindled in the plains behind them. "You're yella," said the Bobolink at last. Tom looked sideways at him and then went on riding straight up and silent. Ginger glanced at the rough-coated Mustang and went on lifting her front feet high. The Bobolink would not let it stand at that. He wanted to hurt Tom as much as Tom had hurt his wrist and feelings. "You got a head full of dollar marks," said the Bobolink with the truculence of youth headstrong with drink. "You're a disgrace, that's what you are. If the old man had been there, he would have dropped dead from shame. You, a Nolan, backing down from the 30 lousy Grahams." "You better wait until you sober up," said Tom gently enough. Hell, I'm as sober as I ever am, ain't I? Why the devil do you think I drink, huh? You riding herd on me all the time is enough to make me drown myself. I'm sick of it. Ever since the day I was born, I've had to ask your permission to so much as eat. You object to my drinking, you object to my making eyes at Mexican dames. You'll have me going to church the next thing I know. Sure, if you hadn't stepped up and started running the crazy end, we'd both be saddle tramps. Well, run the crazy end and leave me alone. Fuzzy and Sidewinder evidently concurred, albeit they were astonished to hear the bobolink so angry and talking to Tom Nolan that way. I don't want to run you, said Tom, but when the Grams... Quite rightly, Bob scented an apology there, and he charged to attack the most vulnerable spot. Yah, he jeered, the Grams. They move in here with so much money that no man can say no. They buy up half of Arizona with what they rustled out of Texas. They're big, and before they came, the Nolans owned the state. And now what are we? And they'll cut our throats before they're through. They're trying to do it now. Bob, tomorrow you'll be... To hell with tomorrow. Tomorrow the Grams will wreck the crazy end if they get a chance. They hate us because we're the biggest anywhere around, because they want our range and the ranch. Sure, you can patch it up. Please, Mr. Graham, we're scared to death of you, so we'll be good boys. Us Nolans are tame now. Please, Mr. Graham. Bah! The only way to settle those fools is to ship them in wooden boxes to Booth Hill filled with Nolan lead. Times have changed, Bob. Arizona doesn't wink at murder. Murder? Who said anything about murder? We can outshoot the lot of them, force them into a fight, and give them even breaks. That ain't murder. You forgot, said Tom, that Martin Graham has got a lot to say at Flagstaff. Yeah, Flagstaff. We used to own the governors down to their gaiters, but we don't now. We're dead and we don't know it. Why, damn it, two vaqueros didn't take off their hats when we rode into Rio Camargo this morning. A fight wouldn't help matters, said Tom. I am trying. I know what you're trying to do, so does everybody else. You turned parson and you're yellow to boot. Mom must have had a blue nose in her ancestry that we didn't know anything about. Yeah, I know what you're trying to do. You think if you can marry that chunk of ice, you'll patch everything up. Bob, you're drunk. Tomorrow you'll... Oh, sure, maybe you're ice enough yourself to marry her. That's all you are. Ice. You're a frozen money bag in the shape of a man. Business, stock, and then that Mary Graham. You say one more word, Tom said quietly, and drunk or not, I'll knock you off that horse. Scared of the Graham, so you get tough with me. Well, I'm through taking your guff, Tom Nolan. I'm finished. Doesn't matter and never did matter what I do. It's wrong, all wrong. For a week you railed at me for pulling that trick on Alan, but nobody knew about it until today except you. You've ridden herd on me the last time. Tom Nolan looked at the bobolink. The kid had never gotten this angry before. Maybe it was the whiskey doing it, but whatever it was, Tom Nolan couldn't carry out his threat. The bobolink was neither as tall nor as heavy as himself, and besides, the bobolink had the fitness of feature and the grace of their mother. Thinking he had won, the boy suddenly began to grin, and when his face lighted up that way, harshness was impossible. They rode on for a few hundred yards, and then, just as though nothing had happened, the bobolink began to sing about a girl from Texas. Fuzzy and Sidewinder took their eyes off the bobolink's heavy colt and began to breathe more easily. The smell of sage the next morning was mingled with the pungent smoke of greasewood fires and the acrid odor of singed hair. All the crazy N vaqueros had rolled out with dawn, and the hacienda had been a montage of flying batwings, whistling ropes, bawling calves, and charging steers since. It was about 9, and Tom Nolan felt as if he had been working since the same time last week. He thundered into the casa on a lathered Mustang and shouted for the wrangler to cut him out another. The wrangler, seeing the condition of Tom's mount, was cutting out a hammer-headed roan. Ginger looked on for a moment, and then, locating Tom, trotted across the hard-packed earth, leaving the herd. There was excitement in the air, and, like the thoroughbred she was, she wanted to be in on it. The hammerhead was fighting off the wrangler's casts, and it looked like Tom would have a moment to himself, so he started towards the house for a hot cup of coffee. He was not in a very happy mood, and the reason he was working himself so hard, harder even than he usually did, was because he wanted to forget Rio Camarca. There was probably a lot of truth in what the bobolink had said, he thought. It was funny to get a slant on yourself the way the world saw you, and it was funny to realize so abruptly how unlike the Nolans he was in his conduct. He had been wild enough before his father had decided to forget his wife's death by blanketing himself with a whiskey fog. The crazy end had started on the downgrade with rapidity, and Tom had laid aside his slingshot and had picked up a rope. He had exchanged a spelling book for a ledger. Nobody had wanted very badly to believe that this handsome young fellow who had at 16 earned a reputation for being a reckless devil was now competent to handle a spread as gigantic as the Crazy N. Seeing his father going down into his grave drink by drink and caring less and less about the Crazy N as a consequence, Tom Nolan had to put the cork on his emotions. And now, at 25, he suddenly realized that his conduct for 9 years had been that of a man of 50. He was almost inside the arch when Ginger gave him a shove from the rear, making him stumble. He whirled, hand stabbing down to Walnut, and then he saw that it was only Ginger after all. The movement startled the horse, and she stepped back, head up, watching him curiously. Tom saw that a white cloth had been laid on the tiled patio for breakfast. He emptied half a bowl of sugar into his hand, and Ginger eagerly thrust out her nose. "Don't mind me," said Tom. "I guess I didn't know I was so upset." He had another pang of regret for startling the mare, and though he knew it wasn't right, he gave her the rest of the sugar. Boot beats sounded on the other side of the patio, and Tom turned to see the bobolink coming across the colored tile. He didn't want to meet Bob, but neither did he want to run away. "Go on," he told Ginger roughly. "You'll ruin your stomach." Ginger looked at the empty bowl and wandered off to snub the hammer-headed roan, who was now being saddled. Tom sank down in a wicker chair and stretched his legs out in front of him, beginning to build himself a cigarette with great casualness. The bobolink was fresh from a shower, and his young face glowed with health and scrubbing. He was fixing a neckerchief around the collar of his spotless linen shirt as he came. "Morning, Tom." "Hello, Bob." "Why didn't you roll me out?" Tom looked at him soberly. "I get it," said the bobolink, sitting down and banging a bell with a small silver hammer. "You thought I'd be better off with sleeping it off." Tom lit his cigarette and was glad the mozo had sidled up. "Coffee," said Tom. "Mine'll wait," said the bobolink, waving the mozo back into the house. "Sore?" "Me?" said Tom. "No." "That's the trouble with you," complained Bob. "You never cuss or drink or get mad. What do you live for?" "Let's ride around this morning," said Tom. The bobolink grinned. "Hell, I don't know why I step on your toes like that. Look, Tom, I'm sorry I made such a mess of things in Rio Camarca. I'll even send an apology to Alan Graham if you want me to, and that ought to show you how sorry I am. I shouldn't have gotten drunk, and I guess I said too much as usual." "That's all right, Bob." The bobolink sighed. "Gee, if you'd just knock me around once in a while, instead of being so nice to me, I'd feel better. Look, Tom, there's plenty to be done. We've got these extra crews and all. I'll bet you're worn out." You let me handle this for a few hours. We'll take shifts. You'll work yourself to death if you don't look out. The mozo brought the coffee, and with it the breakfast of ham and eggs, which the bobolink had not ordered. Tom sipped the coffee. Well, said the bobolink. You're sober? Said Tom. You talk like I don't do anything but drink. That was the first toot I'd had in weeks, and it only lasted 2 hours. Come on, be fair with a fellow, will ya? We're behind, said Tom. That old longhorn blunderbuss took a bunch of them down into the canyons, and we're having a time getting them together and out. I wouldn't feel easy to leave, Bob. Trust me once and see what happens, invited the bobolink. Tom looked at him. All right, I'll give you a big job. Blanchard will have $15,000 waiting for me by 2 o'clock. The papers are in on my desk. The bobolink grinned. What, no caution about not losing it? You're either slipping or reforming. Tom smiled a little. No, there's a caution that goes with it. I heard yesterday that Krantz is active up in the Cordilleras again. The stages are all carrying outriders. Krantz? I thought they put him away for murder. Jails have leaks sometimes, said Tom, and this one leaked Krantz. He's got some boys together. The bobolink laughed happily. Okay, you've given out a job. Want Sidewinder? You need him, and he can't shoot anyway. Cross my heart, I'll be good, Tom, and I'll be back here by 8 at the latest. Tom got up and laid his hand on the bobolink's shoulder for an instant. Then he turned and walked through the arch. He was amazed to see how the day had cleared. He got into the saddle, and the hammerhead tried to buck, and it was fun to spur the devil into line. Ginger looked on appreciatively. See you tonight, called the bobolink. Okay, fella. Chapter 2. The Clash. By contrast with the day before, and especially because it was the siesta hour for the Mexicans, Rio Camarca was a very quiet place. For half an hour, a brown dog had snored peacefully in the middle of the street before the bank. The horses stood with hanging heads before the oasis, too weary to swat at flies. The old church, baked a golden brown, emitted a lazy humming sound, and as a listless choir indifferently responded to a slow priest. Bob Nolan sat upon the shady side of the bank, rolling his rowels slowly back and forth on the earth as he waited for the overland. He was singing without any great harmony or attention to rhythm. A Spanish gentleman strolled by, drifted to a stop, and turned slowly around. Don Bob, he said at last, you might join me in a drink, no? He was a bold man and a desperado. Plumb filled up with lemonade, Carlos. Limonada, said the astounded Spaniard. Lived in Cripple Creek in the state of Colorado. You heard me. But Ave Maria, it will ruin your stomach. And he tangoed round like a wild tornado and everywhere. My stomach, ain't it? He gave a war woo. The Spaniard drifted on up the street, shaking his head to himself. The bobolink leaned out far enough to see if any dust marked the rim of the world and sank back in disappointment. He got up and walked out far enough to disturb the peaceful dog who moved, saw no harm, was coming, and rolled over to snore again. He wandered toward the oasis until he found out where he was going, and then, dutifully, he turned back. The livery stable was a short distance away to his left, and thither he strolled, invited by the depths of the place. A young Mexican, attired in a dirty pair of jeans and nothing else, was asleep in the doorway, but he had kept half an eye open for the stage so that he could saddle Don Bob's horse in time. He got up now, stretching and blinking. Bob looked down the stalls and saw his man-killer, Dewdrop, looking for trouble with a stallion in the next stall. Give him a rub-down, said the bobolink. Senor? Gasped the boy. You heard me. I know it'll startle him after death, but give him one anyway. Senor, I have soaked your saddle and polished the silver conchas. but do not ask me to wash that horse." "All right," said the bobolink, clinking a gold piece into the boy's hand. "The shock would probably kill him anyway." He wandered out again, and apparently nothing had changed. There were 3 new mounts across the square. But he paid them no heed. He was beginning to get concerned about the overland stage. It occurred to him that he might have some fun scaring Blanchard about something, and so he quickened his pace a bit toward the bank. A plan was forming in his mind as he walked. He would suddenly rush in, shouting that Krantz had held up the stage, and then he would lead a posse out to meet it. And he'd see that Blanchard got a bad mount so that he'd work off a few pounds in sweat. His grin widened. He had not seen anyone coming out of the dim interior of the bank, and his stride had been very swift. He collided head-on with Mary Graham. She had a little Stetson on her head, and when she went back against the wall of the passageway, the hat was tilted over her eyes so that she couldn't see. The bobolink stepped back and bowed with irony. "Your pardon, fair lady. Who am I to obstruct the way of a Graham?" She saw him, and her dark eyes flamed. Her chin went up, and her hand tightened upon her quirt. Bob caught a movement to his left and stepped back, facing around. Alan Graham was standing straight and haughty inside the door, looking down his thin nose very distastefully. "You will apologize to my sister," said Graham stiffly. The bobolink looked him over from black hat to black boots and then grinned very broadly. He bowed to Mary. "Even though you are nothing but a damned Graham, Mrs. Graham, I extend my most sincere apologies," stated the bobolink. "A dove can't help if it gets born in a snake's nest." "You are insulting," said Mary. "Sometimes," said Bob. "Alan," said Mary in a commanding tone. Alan stepped between them. "On your way, cowboy. There are insults and insults, but at the time and place, that was the worst." But the bobolink remembered his orders. "Unless you own the bank by now, I'll go in," said Bob Nolan. He started, but his way was blocked by an incredibly thin fellow whose beard was like a black spike. The bobolink had never seen him before. Although Bob could have sworn that the street had been deserted 10 seconds before, he was conscious of a crowd. "If this belongs to you," said the bobolink, turning back to Alan Graham and jerking his thumb at the stranger, "take it away while it's still in one piece." "You're sure of yourself, aren't you, Nolan?" said Alan, his dark mouth twisted into a strangely bitter smile. "That's no credit to me," said Bob cheerfully. "Any man would have guts when he's talking to coyotes." He was standing now with Alan blocking the passage to the street, and the stranger barring his way into the bank. And he read a warning flash in Alan's slitted eye. Bob whirled. The stranger's gun was just starting to clear leather. With a swift step sideways and a lightning draw, Bob slammed his Colt muzzle down on the stranger's wrist. The man yelped with pain and dropped the gun. A swift rustle as of a striking snake warned the bobolink. Behind him, Alan was drawing, and the hammer of the ivory-handled 6-gun clicked as it came back. There was no time to turn. The bobolink didn't. His 4-pointed rowels were sharp as lancets, and his kick would have done credit to a Missouri mule. The spikes gashed through the leather and cloth. Alan yiped with the agony of it and instinctively raised his foot and snatched at his shin, sick with stabbing pain. The bobolink came around, bringing the stranger's gun closer with his foot as he whirled. Alan was trying to recover his aim, but he did not have time. Grabbing the Colt muzzle, the bobolink gave it a savage wrench to one side. Alan could not hold it. The bobolink scooped the other weapon off the passage floor and whipped about to grab the stranger by the arm and catapult him into Alan so that he could cover them both. It happened so swiftly that the watching crowd had not time to gasp until now. They hastily cleared the line of fire behind the stranger, and Alan fixed their eyes on the carelessly held gun in the bobolink's hand. "So that," said Bob, "is the way you like to play. Get a man going and coming and shoot him flat. I always thought that a rattlesnake would refuse to sleep with you, but I know it now." Alan nursed his shin and glared at the bobolink. The stranger was gripping his limp wrist and looking around for a doctor's sign. The bobolink tipped his hat to Mary Graham. "Lady, I got to apologize for this brother of yours. He don't know it ain't considered etiquette to plug a man from behind in Arizona. You Grahams may be running this country, but you don't happen to be setting up the rules for gunplay." The girl was confused. She glanced wonderingly at her brother, and then straightened up to face Bobolink. "You are making a spectacle of us all." "I aim to be spectacular, man. I'm sorry you've had the hard luck of growing up with this skunk, but I ain't the one to do anything about it." Bob looked down at Alan's gun. It was a cavalry model Colt, long and heavy, and it had been specially made on order. The steel was chased with gold in a flowing, intricate pattern. The ivory butt was carved with rearing horses, and instead of the Colt emblem in the discs, there was a big gold G. "A Graham gun," said the bobolink, grinning. "Alan, by the right of you pulling this, contrary to established law and order, I'm going to put this in a glass case and keep it on the living room table. Maybe you won't be so careless with the next one you get." Alan's thin nostrils flared angrily. "That's stealing," said the bobolink. "That's the first time I heard you was so particular." He motioned toward the street. "You better take that sister of yours home, and the next time she comes out, send a man with her." The bobolink turned, thrusting the guns into his belt, and walked into the bank. Blanchard was rubbing his hands together. "That was a very fortunate escape, Mr. Nolan. A very fortunate—" "Save it," said the bobolink, going through the gate and sitting down in an easy chair. "Use your wind in whistling up that stage." Through the big window he could see the stranger, Alan, and the girl approaching their horses, but he did not watch them mount. Alan was also looking back. He turned and helped Mary into her side saddle, and then he pulled the stranger back out of earshot. Drawing an old envelope from his pocket, Alan scribbled on it, "You know where this goes, Fenner." The man nodded. "I got to get my wrist fixed. It's hurting like hell." "Get it fixed and then ride." Alan whirled and sprang into his saddle. "Where is Fenner going?" said Mary. "None of your business," snapped her brother. "You and those damn Nolans. You're never to look at Tom Nolan again. Do you hear?" She looked contemptuously at him. "It's not for you to tell me what to do." A shout up from the streets heralded the approach of the stage. Alan Graham looked back and saw that it had brought the bobolink to the walk again. His eyes black and narrow. Alan grinned maliciously. Chapter 3. An Empty Saddle. Silence and moonlight lay upon the crazy inn, and the dough buildings were softened and silvered, and the grounds looked as though dark silk had been spread between casa and corral. In the patio, Tom Nolan lay dozing, stretched out in a wicker chair. The fountain in the center splashed musically, and jonquils scented the air. The tiled walk shone glossily as the moon reached over the rim of the house. From where he sat, Tom could look through the arch and see the road stretching out like a river into hazy nothingness. But the day had been long work, and had been arduous, and for more than 4 hours he had seen nothing at all, his eyes closed into light slumber. He did not know what awakened him. It was not the moon. It had not been a sound in the night because the night was still. But he started up with the name Bobolink half uttered on his lips. He started up with the Bobolink's voice screaming in his ears, but there had been no sound and the night was still. Something like terror was in Tom Nolan's heart, but there was no reason for it he could find. He could still hear Bob's voice echoing in his mind, growing fainter and fainter and then vanishing altogether. And he knew that the Bobolink's face had been there before him the instant before he had opened his eyes. Nervously, Tom snapped open the cover of his watch and saw that it was nearly midnight. He paced towards his brother's room and looked inside, but the boy was not there. A pair of knee boots were lying on their sides, crumpled and empty. Tom went back to the chair and again studied his watch. He strode to the gate and looked down the road. Probably took his time, Tom told himself. Probably met his friends. But there was no feeling of conviction in the thought. He could still remember that he had heard Bob scream, and he could not shake the feeling that the boy had been there, looking anxiously at him. Tom returned to the chair, but he did not lie back in it. He sat on the edge and built himself a cigarette. He spilled some tobacco and was surprised to see how his hands were shaking. No use getting upset, Tom told himself. He'll be along. And still there was no conviction in it. Indistinctly, he recalled that the ranch would be in bad shape if Bob lost that money, but that was far from being his main concern. He lighted up and blew smoke at his boot toes, where it hung along the cold tile like gauze. He was unable to relax, and without realizing what he was doing, he put out the cigarette and reached for the makings of another. For a half hour of eternity, he sat or walked or leaned on the gate across the bottom part of the arch, and then he heard the horse coming. Even before he saw the animal, he knew it was the man-killer Dewdrop. The horse hammered into sight, head stretched out and front feet blurring. He saw the stables and began to slack up. The saddle was empty. Tom thrust through the gate and grabbed a riata from peg under the arch. He swept the loop behind him and cast it outward and up. When he yanked, he had the bronco's forelegs. He went up the riata hand over hand. The Bobolink's horse was lathered from the long run and shivering with the exhaustion of terror. "Steady," said Tom. He was cold all over. "Whoa, steady, boy." He reached for the saddle and found it damp and sticky with blood. He stared at his darkened fingers with widening eyes and then shifted his glance down the road. He flipped the riata away from the bronc, then turned to run toward the harness shed. Outside he stopped and whistled shrilly, and then he plunged within and came back with bridle and saddle. Ginger came, primely trotting, ears up in wonder at being called at so late an hour. Tom saddled with swiftness, and Ginger was so impressed by his seriousness that she did not pretend to fight the bit. Tom quickly led her to the casa and left her for a moment while he went in to take his Winchester from the rack and buckle his gun belt. He mounted and touched Ginger's flank with a spur, and again, sensing his mood, she leapt forward into a lope. The moon showed every detail of the sage, every pebble in the wagon trail. Far off the glowing sky outlined a flat row of buttes. A dry lake was filled with magic water, and over the apparent surface skated the black form of a frightened wolf. The smooth roll of Ginger's hooves upon the soft earth was not loud enough to muffle the hunting cry of another wolf half a mile to the fore. Tom heard it with a shiver. It sounded again, and this time it was answered closer at hand. There was silence for a mile or more. The hoofbeats were the only sound. A coyote pack began to yap with shrill hysteria just ahead, and in an instant Tom saw them on the road before him, swift gray shapes in the moonlight. They did not see him for a moment, and then he was upon them. Ginger fought her head, trying to bolt. Tom drew his Colt and fired into the thick of the fleeing pack. He pulled up beside the long, still shadow in the sand and slowly got down. Again, the night was quiet except for a slow breeze which whispered in the sage. Tom knelt. He was numb of mind and body. The fact could not reach him, not yet. His lips moved to form the name, and through his mind ran the childish song his mother used to sing. Bobolink, bobolink, spink, spank, spink. Bobolink, bobolink. This was not the bobolink here, and he was not Tom Nolan. All this was as unreal as a mirage, and in a moment the wind which moaned and the moon which sailed in the sky would vanish, and the scene would be a real scene. No, it was not real, but even if it was not real, Tom knew he might as well go through the motions of examining this thing which looked so much like the bobolink. A gun was clutched in the still warm fist, the bobolink's gun. Not another was around. Gently Tom pried it from the clutching fingers. It had been fired 3 times. He dropped it and stood up. He was amazed to see how clearly his mind worked. If the bobolink had fired 3 shots somewhere near, there would be another man. There had to be. The bobolink seldom missed. He walked out in a sweeping circle. Ginger tagged him, nervous at the smell of blood and the thickness of the death-laden air. The other man was a tall, thin fellow. He was sprawled out over a boulder, and his black hat was dangling by its chin thong still in place. His gun was empty, and just beyond him was a Henry, also empty. Tom did not know the fellow. He felt no animosity toward him. He could feel nothing. He knelt and ran his hands through the man's pocket. He found a piece of paper, but he did not look at it. Tom got up and walked back to the bobolink. Standing there, he saw there was another patch of cover across the road. He walked to that, and under his feet he felt empty cartridges roll. Winchester 44s. Again, he returned to the bobolink and stood there for a very long time, trying to realize that the boy was dead. He couldn't. He knelt at last to open the paper and turn it toward the moon. He could barely make out the writing on the back. Nolan is alone and heading for his ranch with a bankroll. Get him halfway. There was no signature, but the message was written on an old envelope. It was not hard to make out the address. Alan Graham, Rio Camarca, Arizona. Tom could feel himself coming to life. He reached over to move Bob's hat down over his face to shut out the moon. It must have been the shadow of the hand which told Bob for the first time that someone was there. He opened his eyes and strove to turn his head. Tom's heart began beating again. Eagerly he shoved his hand under Bob's shoulder and tried to raise him. "Hello, Tom," whispered Bob. "Kid," said Tom shakily, "I thought you were dead." "You aren't far wrong, fella." Bob tried to smile. His shirt was soggy and there were 2 holes in the front of it. He indicated the direction of the dead man with his eyes. "He wasn't so good." Tom had gone into swift activity now. He ripped off his own shirt and began to tear it into strips for bandages. With a feeble motion of his hand, Bob sought to stop him. I've been here for years. I waited for you, Tom." He began to cough, and black bubbles formed on his lips and exploded and formed again. "You'll be all right," said Tom, opening the bobolink's shirt. He saw that one bullet had hit over the right lung, and that the other had torn into the abdomen. The blood had coagulated over the wounds, and Tom's searching hands told him that neither slug had gone all the way through. "It's no use," protested Bob. It just hurts when—" "I'll tell you, you'll be all right," said Tom urgently. Bob grinned, but his eyes were weary. "Still the same, Tom. You think you can even order me from kicking off?" "Oh, hell," said Tom, working with the bandages. "I never meant to ride you about what you did. You'll pull through this. You've got to pull through." "It ain't any use, Tom. Look, don't waste time. I was late, and he's been gone an hour or more. It's Graham, Tom. I had a row with him, and now he's got the money." Tom began to understand now that the bobolink might not have long to live, and with that bitter knowledge came a surge of fury against Alan Graham, a driving rage which would not be stayed. He stopped his work and looked down at the haggard face of the youth. Bob had shut his eyes again. A certain limpness had come over him, and though Tom's hand sought out and found the feeble beating of his heart, he began to feel that Bob was right. Only sheer courage had made the boy hold on this long, and for him the gates of death were swinging open. Hoofbeats rolled down the road, and Tom started up to see Fuzzy, quirting a Mustang and coming like a tornado. Fuzzy drew to a rearing stop and stared down at Bob. He tore his eyes away and looked at Tom. "What's happened?" Tom hardly heard his foreman. Bob's lips were moving again, and Tom knelt. "Don't let him get away," whispered the bobolink. Tom gripped the boy's hand. He stood up, feeling cold and unreal again. "See what you can do," he ordered Fuzzy. "Get him back to the ranch." Tom swung up on Ginger, facing her at right angles to the wagon trail. "So long, Bob." The boy did not move. "Where you going?" demanded Fuzzy. "The Grams," snapped Tom, bringing down his quirt.